Greetings. This is Doc Ock coming at you live and direct tonight from Black Facts Headquarters Central. Greetings to one and all. Hope everybody's had a good day today like I did. I definitely had a ball, you could say. But now I'm going to pass that ball on to you. And what I'm going to ask that you do is go ahead and juggle that ball for a little while, if you don't mind, by just going ahead, giving us a like and a thumbs up, and then subscribing to the Tubular Black Facts channel below. And in the meantime, let's see if we can take you a little bit higher. A little bit higher. Now, we got a proverb for you tonight. Let's see which one we're going with tonight. Oh, yeah. I'm going to go with this one here. Usitukane wakonga na uzazi un galipo. Usitukane wakonga na uzazi un galipo. What does that mean? Don't insult the midwives as long as you're still able to give birth. Yeah. Don't insult the midwives. Yeah, in many parts of the world, even in America as well, midwives are the standard. Now, midwives aren't the standard yet in America, but in other parts of the world, midwives are the people that deliver all the babies. The doctors don't have to deal with that because it's a normal function of the human species and other species as well to give birth. So, again, usitukane wakunga na uzazi un galipo. Do not, don't insult the midwives as long as you're still able to give birth. Not that you're even planning to give birth, but if you can still have a baby, whatever you do, don't insult the midwives. Okay? Okay. So let's keep that in mind. You should have good manners at all times anyway. Don't be going around insulting people in the first place. Something else to think about. Now, meanwhile, we're reading from our book here, Never Caught, a book about a young lady by the name of Ona Judge. Ona Judge. Not Ona Judge, but Ona Judge. That's right. Some mothers that I know or have heard about who named their daughters Iona, right? As in they own themselves, as opposed to somebody else owning them. I'm not sure the origins of her name. I'm not aware of that yet, but maybe in the course of reading through her story, we'll find out about that. So we read yesterday the introduction. Ona Judge was a African woman who had been enslaved by the Washingtons, George and Martha Washington. And so we read the introduction yesterday about how she escaped. And now we're going to go all the way way back in time to around the time of 1773. So before the independence was declared by the British colonists, that's when Ona Judge was born. So her story begins in Virginia around 1773, when the U.S. was not yet the U.S. and slavery is considered acceptable, legal for sure, by white folks who live in what comprises the first 13 colonies, otherwise known as New England. Strangely enough, the American colonies and the American slaves were engaged in a similar quest for freedom. In 1773, the colonists in America, those people who lived in what would be the original 13 states of the U.S., decided they wanted to be free from the British government, making all their own laws, etc. Being free, they didn't want to be taxed without being represented. No taxation without representation and all that kind of rot. The enslaved people, the enslaved Africans of America, who had been brought over from Africa and the Caribbean as part of the slave trade, wanted to be free to live as they choose. These fights for freedom as a country and as a race of people will become as much a part of Ona's life as waking up in the morning and breathing. But first, Ona needs to be born. And who do you think is going to catch that baby? Now you see how my proverb fits in there, right? Our Kiswahili proverb. What did we say it was? Usitukani wakunga na uzazi ungalipo. Don't insult the midwives. Ona's parents were named Betty, a woman born into slavery in Virginia, and Andrew Judge, a white indentured servant from England whose labor had been bought by George Washington for $45. An indenture agreement meant that in return for Andrew's transport to America, as well as food, clothing, shelter, and a small cash allowance, Andrew's labor was owned for the next 4 years of his life by whoever purchased his agreement. Still, Andrew had some small freedoms as an indentured servant that the enslaved population did not have. Betty and Andrew were not married. It was illegal for a black person to marry a white person. In fact, it was illegal for slaves to be married, period. Betty had originally been owned by Daniel Parke Custis, Martha Washington's first husband, who had died after only 7 years of marriage. By this point in America, slavery was as entrenched as the roots of the biggest, oldest tree. Like the Custises, Martha's family, the Dandridges, owned slaves, as did Martha's second husband's family, the Washingtons. When Daniel died, his property was split 3 ways between Martha and their children. This property included both land and the humans owned by the Custises, these enslaved Africans, of which Ona was one. Of which Betty, Ona's mother, was one. My bad. This is the reason why Betty was always classified as a dower slave, meaning that she would always be the property of Martha Washington and her heirs, no matter whom Martha married after Daniel. After Martha married George Washington, she brought at least 84 slaves with her to Mount Vernon, about 100 miles away from the main Custis estate. Betty was chosen to go and was allowed to take her 2-year-old son, Austin. This was a big deal because slave families were often split up after the death of the original owner. It may have also indicated that Betty had already established herself as one of Martha's more valued slaves. Certainly, by 1773, she had become an important part of Martha Washington's team of seamstresses. Betty was the person whom many other seamstresses in the Washington household went to when they needed to learn how to hem a skirt or weave a certain fabric. She was also known as the person who could take a piece of expensive material from London and dye it the exact color Martha wanted without ruining the garment. The creation of clothing was an important job for anyone during colonial times when fabric, not finished clothes, was what was available at a store. Every household needed someone who could use a needle and thread to stitch up some garments for everyone, black and white, to wear. Betty's experience at sewing and spinning kept her out of the fields of George Washington's 5 working farms. Instead, she earned a place working in the spinning house. The spinning house was a building near the mansion where George and Martha lived, where the enslaved seamstresses did their work. Martha herself liked to sew, so sometimes Betty was a part of a larger sewing circle in the mansion alongside her owner. Andrew Judge, Ona's father, was also an expert at sewing. Usually, George Washington did not prefer white indentured servants. He complained that they were unreliable and straight out lazy. Imagine that. Yet George seemed to like and trust Andrew. He was one of George Washington's preferred tailors. Oh, wait a minute. Did I not hit that button? Thought I hit that button already. Oh, shucks. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. He was one of George Washington's preferred tailors, eventually creating the blue uniform George wore when he was named Commander-in-Chief of the American forces in 1775. In 1773, however, George would have been surprised to learn that soon he would be leading the American military forces against the British. Although he was a well-known colonel and respected military man, George would have said his main occupation was farming. He was well aware of the political events that were stirring up the anger of the American colonists. He too felt strongly that Americans should not be ruled across an ocean by King George III of England. He knew that many colonists wanted to form a new country with their own form of democratic government. Yet, like many of his friends and acquaintances, George had protected British control of American land. Like his father and grandfather, George was also a member of the colonial government in Virginia. Turning publicly against his ancestors and the reigning monarch would be a massive and dangerous step. Now, just to put that into context, at that time in history, every white male was considered to be part of the military establishment anyway. That was number one. Number two, all of the major landowners, these plantation owners, they were always high up in the military ranks. Colonel, they were going to be colonels. Okay, if you owned a plantation, you were automatically at the level of at least a colonel or higher. Okay, you weren't even going to come in as a captain or a lieutenant or anything like, because the lieutenants, they go out on the front line. They lead the men in battle. Definitely, you're not going to be doing that. So you'd have to be a colonel or higher to avoid that outcome. And then you would also, they were also part of the governmental structure as well. This is why we talk about systemic racism. Okay, sorry to have to bring in that touch of reality there, but this is a real story, so we have to be real, right? Now let's see what time we got. We got a little bit more time. I'm going to go ahead and finish off this chapter, and then we'll close out for tonight. Neither George nor the country was quite ready to take such a step, but change was in the air, and it was Mother Nature herself who, by throwing a snowball, got the attention of not only George, but Betty too. In 1773, the unimaginable happened. It snowed in Virginia. Farmers like George Washington needed to rely on familiar... What? Oh, wait a minute. In June of 1773, the unimaginable happened. It snowed in Virginia. Wow, talk about global warming. We just had it snow here yesterday, and I thought that was odd because it's April. But they say here it snowed in June. So farmers like George Washington needed to rely on familiar weather patterns. But it was anything but familiar for snow to fall this far south in June. Mount Vernon's crops were at risk, and the people on the plantation were confused. Many of the enslaved Africans saw the late snow as an omen, bringing something bad upon the people of Mount Vernon. Other enslaved Africans believed the snow meant that something good was about to happen. Both turned out to be right. 8 days after the snow fell, Patsy, the daughter of Martha Washington and her first husband, became terribly ill. Only 17, Patsy had been plagued by seizures that had begun during her teenage years. There was no effective treatment for Patsy's condition. Instead, the doctors who cared for Patsy would treat her with bloodletting. Yeah, good old bloodletting. Drawing out her blood as a way to stop the seizures, but it never worked. And the way they did it was with leeches. They'd have the leech, they'd put the critter on your skin, and it would suck the blood out like a vampire. Yeah, it was kind of nasty. And it also didn't work. It was shortly after 4 o'clock on June 19, when Patsy excused herself after dinner to get a letter from her bedroom. When she didn't come back, her soon-to-be sister-in-law, Eleanor Calvert, went to check on her. Patsy lay on the floor of her room in the middle of a violent seizure. Though Eleanor called for help immediately, there was very little anyone could do. Within 2 minutes, Patsy was dead. George Washington, Patsy's stepfather, was devastated. Martha Washington was almost destroyed. When she had been married to her first husband, Martha had borne 4 children: Daniel, Francis, Jackie, and Patsy. The oldest 2 children had died when they were toddlers. To lose another child was pushing Martha off an emotional cliff. In a letter written to his nephew, George Washington stated, "I scarce need add that Patsy's death has almost reduced my poor wife to the lowest ebb of misery." Everyone at Mount Vernon was aware of Martha's pain, especially the enslaved African women, whom she had chosen to work near her in the mansion. Betty, Ona's mother, was one of these women. Only 7 years younger than Martha, Betty had already watched Martha as she endured the deaths of her first husband and first 2 children. She understood how painful it was for Martha to lose another child, especially because by this time Betty had 2 other children besides Austin. And she knew how desperate she would have been if any one of them had died. She may have stood near Martha's bedside, comforting her in her terrible grief, while at the same time helping the household prepare for Patsy's funeral. It would have not been relevant to Martha that Betty was pregnant at this time. The fact that she and Andrew Judge were going to have a baby was not and could not be Betty's priority. We do not know what kind of relationship Andrew had and Betty had. They may have fallen in love. They may have had the kind of relationship that is the opposite of love, the kind of non-consensual encounter where a man uses his strength and privilege to overpower the woman. The truth is that Andrew Judge could have taken Betty against her will, and she would have been unable to do anything about it. His status as a white man would have protected him, just as it does today. Still, it is also possible that Betty entered into this relationship with aims of her own, besides romantic love. Perhaps she believed having a relationship with Andrew could lead to her own freedom and that of her children, because she knew that in a few years, Andrew would become a free man. At that time, he could potentially offer to buy all of them from the Washingtons. We will never know Betty's feelings. All we do know is that Andrew Judge did eventually claim his freedom, but he did not take Betty and his children with him. If he loved Betty, it was not enough to keep him from leaving. Still, in 1773, Andrew was living at Mount Vernon, and sometime during or close to that year, after the strange snowfall and after Patsy's funeral, Betty gave birth to their daughter. They named her Ona Maria Judge. Ona Maria Judge. While there are few records about the births and deaths of slaves, this girl child of mixed race would, as a young woman, walk that tightrope of freedom for African Americans long before her bold descendants in spirit, in other words, Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, made their own escapes from slavery. Like her mother, Betty, Ona learned how to persevere in the face of extreme hardship. Like her father, Ona would eventually free herself no matter who she left behind. Finally, like America itself, Ona would risk everything so that she too could achieve those rights in the Declaration of Independence. In other words, we're talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh yeah, that old pursuit of happiness. That one gets us in trouble every single time. And so that ends the first chapter of our book, on Ona Judge, the story of the slave, one of George and Martha Washington's slaves who escaped to freedom and never looked back. So we'll remind you of our proverb for today one more time. Usitukani wakunga na uzazi un galipo. In other words, don't insult the midwives as long as you're still able to give birth. Excellent proverb. I love that proverb. That's what I'm going to try to remember. Usitukane wakunga na uzazi un galipo. Yeah, it kind of rolls off the tongue after you get used to it. Okay, and I'm working on that part, getting used to it. Meanwhile, let me go ahead and give a wave to Sadiqa Muhammad out here. And I see Sydney Harris over there. Anybody else watching in the wings? I don't see nobody else out there. Okay, cool, cool. And last but not least, let me remind everyone of what needs to be done. Make sure to go ahead and give us a like, a thumbs up if you're looking at us on YouTube. And then go ahead and subscribe below to the Black Facts YouTube channel, otherwise known as Tubular Black Facts. Please do subscribe, and we will be back here tomorrow with another installment. Our special this month, our focus this month is on holidays and holy days. So we start off with April Fool's Day on the 1st. Today we talked about Easter, okay? But we talked about Easter in the context of the Black Madonna. Now, today we did an introduction to the shrine, one of the shrines of the Black Madonna in Germany. And tomorrow we're coming back with some video of a procession, or it's either going to be a video or a slideshow, I'm not sure which, of a procession with the Black Madonna, because these Black Madonnas are alive and kicking, just like you need to be. Oh, almost forgot. All you little children out there, go ahead, lay your little head on your little pillow, on your little bed, close those eyes, and wait for the sun to rise. And when those sunbeams come beaming down on your eyes, go ahead and rise and shine, because the day is thine. That's right. Seize the day. In the new day, we'll be doing it in a new way, and we'll be back here tomorrow night at 9, just like always. Until then, may peace guide your way.